The morning was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The air in our penthouse smelled like freshly brewed coffee and silk, the sort of perfect smell you associate with wealth, success, and order. My robe felt too soft against my skin as I glided through the kitchen, preparing the coffee the way Silas liked it: one heaping scoop of dark roast, a pinch of cinnamon, and 2 drops of vanilla. His mother swore cinnamon helped the heart, and Silas was nothing if not a slave to his mother's suggestions. I was halfway through ironing his shirts when I heard the elevator doors open, followed by the soft click of Silas's shoes across the marble floor. He was already on his phone, tapping out messages, never once acknowledging the quiet ritual of our mornings. "Good morning," I said softly, glancing up as he passed me, barely meeting my gaze. He didn't respond at first, his focus still on the screen. But then, as if he remembered his manners or perhaps noticed that I was waiting, he gave me the smallest of nods. "Morning," he said curtly. "Dinner tonight, Morrison Industries, you remember who's who." I nodded absently, turning the steam iron off and hanging his shirt carefully. I knew the list of people. I always knew the list: Richard Morrison, the CFO, the partner who collected teapots, and of course, the wives who were more concerned with their children's schools than any real conversation. It had always been like that. I set the iron down and moved to the counter, finishing up his vitamins, carefully setting them in the silver dish his mother gave us as a wedding present. The dishes, the clothes, the routine, it was all perfect. It was all part of the act, wasn't it? But somewhere between the smiles and the pleasantries, the cracks began to form. The cracks begin. At dinner that evening, I sat beside Silas as always, the position I had held for 12 years, the one that was never questioned. The wives, of course, clung to their perfect facades, exchanging gossip and updates on the latest school events and vacation plans. But tonight, something felt off. It was as though the air was thicker than usual, and I was suffocating in it. We just settled into our usual positions at the table, Silas at the head, me beside him, and that's when she arrived. Brittany. She glided into the room with the kind of confidence only youth and beauty could bring. Her dress clung to her body, whispering secrets as it moved, and there was something about the way she slid into the space between us, as if she had every right to be there. As if I wasn't even a part of the equation. "See," she said, the nickname so familiar, so casual, like a secret only they shared. Silas smiled at her. "Game changer," he added, his voice warm, almost proud, and I froze. She laughed high-pitched, the kind of laugh that was supposed to put everyone at ease, but all it did was make my skin prickle. It was clear who she was there for, and it wasn't me. I tried to mask the hurt, forcing a smile and asking her about her background, trying to be gracious. But every word felt empty. Every question I asked felt like a rehearsed line I was too tired to memorize. She answered, her voice soft and smooth, clearly enjoying the attention. She tilted her head, eyes meeting mine, and made a comment about the view from our terrace, about how she'd seen it before. I didn't remember her ever being there. At that moment, my stomach twisted. The familiar unease I'd been pushing down for years finally started bubbling to the surface. And then it happened. "C says, you're an angel for keeping everything running," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "He needs that." The wives at the table glanced at each other, their eyes darting between me and Silas, and then quickly back to their plates. I held my glass steady, my fingers gripping it too tightly as my pulse quickened. The room had tilted on its axis, and I was just along for the ride. The tension was suffocating, and I couldn't breathe through it. Then I couldn't help myself. "Do you do that often?" I asked, eyes narrowing at her hands, which were casually grazing Silas's tie, readjusting it like it was second nature to her. The table fell silent, all eyes on me, even Silas. His laugh was strained, like he'd been holding his breath for too long. "You're the one who has no sense of humor, Juniper," he said. His tone was light, but there was an edge to it, something sharp beneath the surface. I felt my heart race, but I held my ground. I wasn't backing down. "Is tying his tie part of your job description, or is that just a bonus?" I asked, keeping my voice even calm, but there was something inside me that broke wide open at that moment. The room was frozen. No one dared move. Even the wine glasses seemed to tremble slightly in the still air. Brittany's smile faltered, just for a second, and in that moment I knew. After dinner, as the night wore on and the guests began to leave, Silas remained strangely silent. He didn't speak to me on the way home, didn't ask how my day had been or if I was tired. The car ride was filled with the low hum of the city and the occasional click of his phone. I watched the world pass by through the window. The lights of the city flickered, their glow reflecting in the glass, but nothing seemed to matter anymore. When we arrived at the penthouse, I knew what was coming. "Juniper," he said finally, his voice low and controlled, "you've embarrassed me in front of my board in front of Morrison. You can't keep doing this." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked past him, heading to the guest room, the one I'd never really stayed in before, the one that was always meant for someone else. But tonight, it was for me. I heard Silas's footsteps behind me, felt his presence in the doorway before he said, "You'll sleep in here until you apologize. And when you do, we'll talk." My hand tightened on the doorknob, but I said nothing. I simply nodded. "Okay." The door closed behind me with a soft click, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. As I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, I knew something had changed. This wasn't about an apology anymore. This was about something much bigger. What had started as a small crack in the perfect facade was now a chasm, and I wasn't sure I could fix it. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't want to. The smell of lavender lingered in the air as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of tea in front of me. The rain outside the window wasn't just tapping on the glass, it was pouring in full force, as if the sky itself was trying to drown out the noise in my head. I ran my fingers along the edge of the porcelain cup, tracing patterns I didn't care to follow. My mind was far away, somewhere distant, back in time. Flashback to childhood. I was just a little girl, maybe 8 or 9, and I could hear the familiar hum of my mother's voice from the kitchen. She was always busy, always moving, always working. But not for me. Not for me like she worked for Derek. Derek was my older brother. The golden child. The one who could do no wrong. He was the loud, charming one, the kind of boy who would get in trouble for sneaking cookies, but still somehow come away with an extra serving. The kind who would get a slap on the wrist for breaking the neighbor's window, while I'd get an hour of lectures for a fraction of his mistakes. But it wasn't just the discipline. It was the way my mother doted on him. She'd bake his favorite cookies, make sure his clothes were pressed just right, all while I sat at the kitchen counter, quietly doing my homework or folding laundry. I remember one night, I must have been around 10, standing in the kitchen after dinner. My father was at the table reading the paper, and Derek was showing off his latest grades, straight A's of course. But when I tried to share my report card, my mother didn't even look up from the stove. "Not now, sweetie," she said absent-mindedly. "I'm busy." But Derek had her undivided attention. The cracks in the foundation of our family had started there, in the smallest moments, the ones no one thought to notice. The introduction to Silas. Years later, Silas came into the picture, a whirlwind wrapped in designer suits and promises of success. He was charming in the way people like him always are. He didn't need to try hard, his success, his wealth, it was all part of his allure. When we first met, it felt like magic. Silas wasn't like other men I'd known. He was confident, assertive, and had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. That first date was perfect. I thought to myself, finally, someone who sees me. But then, as we got more serious, I started to see the cracks in Silas's polished exterior. It wasn't blatant at first, just small things. Little hints. Like the way he always subtly manipulated conversations, nudging me to agree with him to prioritize his needs before mine. But I let it go. After all, he was successful. He knew what he was doing, and maybe I didn't. The first signs of control. I remember the first time Silas started taking control of my family dynamics. We had just gotten engaged, and I had invited my parents over for dinner. They were excited, of course. This was going to be their first real introduction to the man I was marrying. I was nervous, but Silas seemed cool, calm, collected. But when my mother started asking questions about how Silas had built his empire, how he was so successful, He answered them in a way that made it clear he didn't want her probing too much. His smile was too perfect, his answers too rehearsed. It was only later, when my mother asked me privately if I was sure about marrying him, that I realized Silas had already made himself the center of my world. I didn't stand up to him, of course. I couldn't. I was too afraid of what would happen if I did. And that fear, subtle at first, grew and grew until it took up every corner of my life. Family dynamics, the final push. As time went on, Silas became more involved in my family's business, almost too involved. At first, I thought it was normal. He had connections, after all. He was good at what he did. But then, I began noticing something odd. He started whispering in my ear about how much easier it would be if I just helped my family see things his way. It was a casual comment at first. "You should have your mother cut back on some of her spending," he'd say, as if it were a simple suggestion, but I could see the weight behind his words. "And Derek, well, he's always been a bit reckless with his choices. We could help him, but only if you're on my side." It wasn't until I noticed how Silas would speak about my family, how he'd undermine them behind their backs, that I realized how much of my world he was trying to control. And I let him. At the time, I justified it. I wanted to make Silas happy. I wanted to be the perfect wife, just like my mother always wanted me to be the perfect daughter. I thought by aligning myself with Silas, I could make everything work. I thought I could control my own place in the world by giving him everything he wanted. But all I was doing was giving him more power. The turning point. The final straw came during a charity event for one of Silas's businesses. We were there in front of all of his colleagues, his friends, his business partners, and there she was again, Brittany. She was leaning against Silas like she belonged there, her laughter too loud, her smile too eager. And Silas, well, he couldn't keep his eyes off her. It was obvious to everyone in the room. I stood there, my smile painted on, my fingers trembling as I held a glass of wine. I tried to act like everything was fine, but inside, everything felt shattered. The cracks in my marriage were no longer small. They were gaping holes. Later that night, I found myself standing in front of a full-length mirror in our bedroom, staring at the woman in front of me. The woman I had become. The woman who had lost herself. I was done pretending. I was done playing the perfect wife in the background of Silas's life. I took a deep breath, my reflection staring back at me like a stranger. And for the first time in years, I whispered to myself, I deserve better than this. I turned toward the closet, my fingers brushing over the handles of the dresses that were once meant for someone else. I grabbed one, the emerald dress that Silas had always disapproved of. I wasn't going to be his puppet anymore. The silence between Silas and me was suffocating. As the days passed after our last encounter, I found myself in a strange, liminal space. The guest room had become a quiet refuge, a room I never thought I'd call my own. But somehow, it felt more like me than the sterile luxury of our master bedroom ever had. I stared out the window, watching the city below, the flashing lights of taxis weaving through the streets. It was all so alive down there, people rushing, living, moving forward. Meanwhile, I felt frozen, stuck in a life that wasn't mine. But not for much longer. Escalation, a toxic routine. Life with Silas had always been about keeping up appearances. The perfect house, the perfect job, the perfect dinners. He thrived in that world, surrounded by people who admired him for the very things that made me invisible. And at first, I played my part, silently supporting him, never questioning the world he built around us. But the cracks were showing, not just in our marriage, but in the way Silas treated me, like a mere accessory. A trophy wife to show off at galas, someone to entertain his guests and make sure everything looked effortless. I had been complacent. I had spent years hiding behind my smile, playing the perfect role. But now, sitting in the guest room, it felt like the world was catching up with me. Every minute I spent in that room, every thought that drifted through my mind, brought me closer to an undeniable truth. I had lost myself. And if I didn't find a way out, I'd stay lost forever. A familiar threat, Brittany. That evening, Silas called me, just like he always did, while I was sipping tea and reading through the notes for the dinner party that evening. "We're going to have a great time tonight," he said casually. I could hear the faint sound of music in the background, a reminder that the world outside was still moving. He didn't notice my silence on the other end of the phone. "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The usual suspects," he replied, sounding too carefree for my liking. "And Brittany, of course, you remember her, don't you?" Brittany, the name hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. I could practically hear the unspoken connection between them. She had been showing up more often lately, at dinners, at events, her presence now a constant in our lives. But it wasn't just the physical presence of Brittany that unsettled me, it was the way Silas looked at her. The way he smiled when he spoke about her. I could tell I wasn't blind. This was more than just an innocent flirtation. Silas was hiding something from me, and I didn't know how much longer I could pretend I didn't know what it was. Confrontation at dinner. Dinner that night was everything I dreaded and more. The atmosphere was tense, as usual, with the obligatory small talk and pleasantries floating through the air. But underneath it all, I could feel something simmering. The air felt thicker than the truffle oil in the air, heavier with each passing moment. And then she arrived, Brittany. She walked in with that same confident swagger, the one that made everyone else in the room feel just a little smaller, just a little more aware of how underwhelming they were in comparison. Silas greeted her like an old friend, his hand on her back for just a moment too long. I wanted to scream, but instead I just smiled, tight, forced, the way I had perfected over the years. "You look stunning tonight, Juniper," Brittany said with a smirk, her eyes scanning me like I was a piece of furniture. "That dress. How does Silas allow you to wear it? Doesn't it clash with his vision?" I swallowed hard, refusing to let the sting of her words get to me. But there it was, another jab, another subtle way she made me feel like I didn't belong. I didn't look at Silas as I spoke, my voice even but cold. "I don't need Silas to allow me to wear anything, but thanks for the compliment." The table fell silent. There it was, the first crack that Silas hadn't expected. The first hint that I wasn't just his accessory anymore. And I could see the unease creep into his expression, the smallest shift in his body language that told me he hadn't anticipated this. Brittany tilted her head, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Oh, I'm sure you don't," she said, voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You've always been so independent, haven't you?" Silas's reaction. It wasn't until we were halfway through dinner that Silas spoke, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Juniper, I don't know what your problem is, but you've been acting strange all evening," he said, his eyes flashing. "It's just dinner, you need to relax." I felt my heart race, the anger bubbling up from a place I hadn't recognized in years. I had been silent, yes. I had been calm, yes. But now, everything felt too raw to ignore. I stood, not caring if anyone noticed. The room went silent, all eyes on me as I made my way to the door. I didn't turn back as I spoke, my voice steady, but filled with something I hadn't felt in far too long, defiance. "I'm done pretending, Silas," I said, my words sharp and calculated. "I'm done pretending everything is fine when I know you've been lying to me, to all of us." The silence that followed was deafening, but I didn't wait for him to respond. I couldn't. I walked out, not looking back. The door to the penthouse slammed behind me, the echoes of it ringing in my ears. I stood in the hallway, my hand shaking slightly as I gripped my purse. I could hear Silas's voice from inside, muffled, filled with frustration. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I wasn't playing by his rules. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't waiting for his approval. I was walking away, but I wasn't sure where to go. I hadn't expected it to happen like this. The night had started innocently enough. After the confrontation with Silas at dinner, I told myself I would finally start taking control of my life. No more waiting for approval. No more silencing myself to keep the peace. It was my turn to be free, and nothing, no one would hold me back. But Silas had other plans. I stood by the window in the guest room, staring out at the city. The lights below were distant, like a world I didn't belong to anymore. I was just another woman in the midst of a marriage that had slowly choked me, but I was ready to breathe again. My phone buzzed, a message from my lawyer, Margaret Winters. Everything's moving forward, it read. I've got everything we need. Are you ready? I stared at the message, knowing that it was time to make things real. To step away from the charade I'd been living for years. I typed back, yes, I'm ready. But before I could hit send, the sound of the door to the penthouse slammed open. I froze. The incident, Silas's rage. I heard his footsteps first, heavy, fast, frantic. Silas's voice followed, low and controlled, but laced with anger. I didn't move. I couldn't. I knew what was coming. The storm had been brewing for days, and now it was here. Juniper, his voice carried up the hallway, demanding attention. You've made a huge mistake. I didn't respond at first, but I could feel the rage vibrating through the walls of the apartment. There was something in the way he spoke, a deep fear in his tone that I hadn't heard before. It made me uneasy, but I stood my ground. He appeared in the doorway of the guest room, his face twisted in frustration. His usually impeccable appearance was gone, his tie askew, his suit wrinkled as if he had rushed through the night. But what struck me most was the cold, calculating look in his eyes. The same eyes I had once admired. The eyes that now seemed more like the eyes of a man who had lost control. You think you can just walk away from everything? He spat, his voice trembling with a barely contained fury. This is my world, you're nothing without me, nothing. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking but my voice steady. I'm not nothing, Silas, I never was. I watched him take a step forward, his breath coming in short bursts, his fists clenched. There was a dangerous calmness about him that sent a shiver down my spine. You've crossed a line, he continued, his voice lowering, and I'm not going to let you ruin everything I've built. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew. I had always known. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. The silence between us was thick with everything unspoken, the years of control, the manipulation, the power plays. He didn't need to say anything more. I understood now. But then, in the blink of an eye, it happened. Before I could react, he was across the room, his hands grabbing my shoulders with a force that made my knees buckle. I gasped, trying to push him off, but his grip was too strong. You don't get to walk away, he hissed, his words sharp like a knife. Not like this, not after everything I've done for you. The anger in his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't just fury, it was desperation. Desperation to keep me in his grasp, no matter the cost. In that moment, I realized something I had known deep down for years but had refused to acknowledge. Silas wasn't just controlling me, he was terrified of losing control over everything he had. And I was the last piece of his carefully curated life. With all the strength I could muster, I shoved him off me. He stumbled back, the shock on his face quickly replaced with rage. I'm not your possession, Silas, I said through clenched teeth, every word sharp, every word filled with the weight of years of resentment. And you don't get to keep me anymore. The aftermath shattered trust. He didn't speak for a long moment, but his eyes were wild now, searching for some semblance of power, some way to regain control. But this time there was no hiding it. The mask had slipped, and for the first time in years, I saw the truth of who Silas really was. His pride had been shattered, and with it, any semblance of the man I thought I knew. You've made your bed, Juniper, he finally muttered, his voice low and dangerous. But you'll regret this. You can't just walk away from me. I already have, I said, my voice cold and steady. I turned toward the door, knowing that this was the moment I would make the decision. The moment that would either shackle me to a life of silence or set me free. As I stepped into the hallway, I could hear Silas's voice behind me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I had finally realized something. There was no turning back now. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I tapped the screen. Margaret had sent another message. Everything's in motion, it read. But I need you to make one final move. You'll have to act fast. This can't wait. My heart raced as I read the words. This was it, the final step. The world outside seemed to stretch out before me, full of endless possibilities. But would I be ready to take the plunge? I didn't know, but I couldn't turn back now. The lights in the hospital room were too bright, too sterile. The smell of antiseptic hung in the air, and I could hear the steady beeping of a heart monitor, but none of it felt real. I stared at the white ceiling above me, the pain in my ribs a dull ache in the background. My wrist, still throbbing in agony, had been wrapped tightly by the nurses. The bruises that had started to form on my shoulders were still raw, but I couldn't bring myself to care about the physical wounds. Not now. The door creaked open, and I turned my head slowly, expecting to see a nurse or maybe Silas, who had been silent since he shoved me earlier. But it was Silas. It was Margaret Winters, my lawyer, standing in the doorway, her usual calm demeanor replaced by something softer, something more concerned. "Juniper," she said gently, walking into the room and pulling up a chair beside my bed. Her eyes scanned me, not just as a lawyer but as a friend, and I realized, for the first time in a long time, how much I needed that. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low and filled with compassion. I laughed bitterly, the sound cracking in my throat. "Do I look okay?" Margaret didn't flinch, her gaze steady and unyielding. "You're here," she said. "That means you're surviving, but I need to ask you something." I raised an eyebrow, pushing myself up a little in the bed, wincing at the sharp pain in my side. "What is it?" She looked at me, eyes sharp with the seriousness of the situation. "What happened, Juniper? How did it come to this?" "The full story." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It wasn't easy, reliving everything, but I knew it was necessary. If I wanted to make it out of this, if I wanted to rebuild my life, I needed to face the truth, all of it. "I don't know when it started," I began, my voice unsteady at first. "Silas was always the golden boy, charming, confident, controlling. I thought I was happy. I thought I was getting the life I wanted. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself." I paused, glancing out the window at the rain beating against the glass. It had been storming all day, the clouds swirling in the sky, as if the universe itself was in turmoil. Just like me. Everything he did was to control me, my choices, my time, my family. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "At first, it wasn't obvious. It was small things. The way he always made sure I was the one who took care of everything, the way he controlled what I wore, what I said. He made me feel like I was his, like I existed only to make him look good." I clenched my fists, the anger rising inside me like fire. But it wasn't just the control, Margaret. It was the isolation. He wanted me to depend on him, to believe that I couldn't function without him. He made me feel weak. Margaret nodded, her expression soft but serious. "And tonight, when you finally pushed back, when you finally fought for yourself, he didn't like it, did he?" "No," I whispered. "He didn't like it, he never did." The incident revisited. I couldn't help but replay the events of the night before in my mind, over and over again. The confrontation, Silas's rage, the fear that had crept in, but also the strength that had grown within me. It was clear now, he was the one who was scared. "He grabbed me," I said, my voice barely audible. "He shoved me against the wall, and I stopped myself, taking a shaky breath. I didn't know what to do." Margaret's eyes were full of understanding, but she didn't say anything. She just sat there, letting me speak, letting me finally release everything I had been holding in for so long. "I don't know when it all became so toxic, so suffocating," I continued, tears pricking at my eyes. "I've been living in this cage, pretending I was fine. But I'm not fine, Margaret. I'm not fine, and I don't think I've ever been fine." The tears came then, streaming down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. For the first time in years, I felt something other than numbness. I felt the truth. And the truth was that I had been suffocating. But not anymore. Hospital findings and evidence. The door opened again, and this time it was a nurse, carrying a small tray with an assortment of medical tools. She looked at me briefly, and I saw the same look that had been in Margaret's eyes, concern, but also a determination to make sure I was heard. "I'm going to take a few x-rays to check for fractures," the nurse explained gently. "Just a precaution." I nodded, feeling my stomach twist. I already knew the answer. My wrist was swollen, and my ribs ached every time I moved, but the physical injuries didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was how much of my spirit had been broken. As the nurse worked, Margaret remained at my side, flipping through some papers on her tablet. I saw her glance at me once, her expression unreadable, before she turned back to the screen. There's something I need to tell you, Juniper, she said after a long pause, her voice serious. What is it? I asked, barely able to focus. The x-rays came back, she said, her tone shifting slightly. You have a broken wrist and bruised ribs, but there's something else. I looked at her confused. What do you mean? Margaret hesitated, but then her eyes met mine with a sharp intensity. We have a chance here, Juniper. A real chance to bring Silas down. My heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? The evidence, she said, her voice low. We have everything we need. There's documentation, emails, financial records, things that Silas thought were hidden but they're not. And there's more. A witness. I felt the weight of her words settle in. Everything that had been hidden, all the manipulation, the control, it was about to be exposed. And I would finally be free. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Derek, my brother. Juniper, I know everything. I've got proof. I'm coming over. We need to talk. I didn't know what to expect, but something in his words made my pulse race. My brother, who had always stayed out of the drama, was now involved. What did he know? I didn't wait to find out. I had to face this head-on. The revolution was happening, and there was no turning back now. The knock on the door was soft but firm, and I could hear the urgency in the way it echoed through the quiet apartment. I hadn't expected Derek to show up, not like this, not after everything that had happened. But here he was, standing in the doorway, his face etched with something between guilt and determination. Juniper, he said quietly, his voice steady but with that familiar edge of worry I'd known my whole life. I think it's time we talk. I didn't speak at first. I just stared at him, taking in the man he had become, the confident, quiet protector, always there when I needed him but never quite able to intervene when it really mattered. Derek had always been on the sidelines of our family's drama, never directly involved, always the one who played it safe. But now he was in the middle of it, caught up in the whirlwind I had stirred. I took a deep breath and motioned for him to come inside. What do you know? I asked softly, trying to mask the fear that still gripped me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something new in him, an understanding, a shared history that neither of us had fully acknowledged until now. Enough, he replied, his voice firm. I've been digging, Juniper. I've been looking into things I didn't want to see, but now I can't unsee them. He paused, his gaze shifting as if he were weighing the next words carefully. I didn't want to believe it, but everything you've been saying, it's all true. Silas has been covering up his tracks for years, manipulating everyone, including me. Family loyalty versus truth. I sat down heavily on the couch, feeling the weight of Derek's words settle into me like a stone. My brother, the one person who had always been my rock, had been kept in the dark, just like me. I never knew the full extent of what he was doing, Derek continued, his voice low. But I've been getting pieces, emails, records, financial transactions. I didn't think it would lead anywhere, but it's all there. It's all been building up behind his back, and I should have seen it before. I nodded, a hollow feeling creeping up inside me. It's not just the money, Derek, I said quietly. It's the control, the manipulation, the way he made me feel like I was nothing without him. I glanced out the window, watching the city below, and suddenly everything felt far too quiet, too still. I've been in that cage for so long, Derek, I whispered, my voice breaking. I've let him control everything from my family to my time, and now, I paused, my hands shaking as I wiped my eyes. Now I don't know who I am anymore. Derek moved closer, sitting beside me on the couch. You're Juniper, the woman who took back her life, the woman who's fighting for herself no matter what. I didn't say anything, but I could feel something stirring inside me, a fire I had long forgot. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a choice. But with that choice came something I wasn't sure I was ready for. The confession. Derek, there's something I need to tell you, I said suddenly, my voice quiet but steady. He turned to face me, his expression softening. What is it? I hesitated, my stomach churning as I considered what to say, but there was no turning back now. I had to tell him the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for too long. I think Silas might have been involved in more than just financial misconduct, I said, my voice trembling with the weight of what I was about to reveal. I think he might be hiding something far darker. Derek's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before I spoke the words I had been avoiding for years. The way he controlled everything. The way he manipulated me, emotionally, mentally, financially. I think he's done it to other people too. I think he's been using his power to hurt people in ways no one knows about. Derek's eyes widened, his jaw tightening. What kind of hurt, Juniper? I paused, feeling the heaviness of the confession weighing down on me. I don't know for sure, but I think it goes beyond just manipulating me. I think he's been crossing lines, lines that go into things far worse than I want to admit, and I'm afraid of what might come out if I push any further. Derek sat back, his hand gripping the arm of the couch. This is bigger than just your marriage, isn't it? I nodded, my throat tight. I think it's much bigger. An ally steps in. The sound of the doorbell interrupted our conversation, and Derek stood up, his face tense with uncertainty. I felt the same way, but there was something in me, something primal, telling me that the time had come to face whatever was on the other side of that door. Derek moved quickly to answer it, and moments later, he returned with someone I hadn't expected to see. Margaret Winters. Her usual businesslike demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked like urgency. Juniper, we need to talk, she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. I could feel the tension building between us, but I motioned for her to sit. What's going on, Margaret? She took a seat beside me, her eyes scanning the room quickly before turning her focus back to me. The evidence you've been gathering, it's all true. Silas's transactions, the embezzlement, the illegal investments. But there's more. She paused, her gaze locking with mine. I've been in contact with a whistleblower, someone inside Silas's company, and they have something that can bring him down for good. I felt a jolt of surprise shoot through me. What kind of something? Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper as she leaned in. It's a recorded confession, from Silas himself. He admits everything. I couldn't process the weight of her words. A recorded confession. How had Silas allowed himself to slip up like that? How had someone gotten close enough to record his voice? My thoughts raced, but before I could respond, Margaret held up a hand, signaling for me to wait. There's more, she continued, her voice serious. The whistleblower wants to meet with you, Juniper. They want your confirmation, your support, because once we go public with this, there's no turning back. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The magnitude of what we were about to do, how much it would cost, how much danger it could bring, was suddenly so clear. And yet, in that moment, I felt something inside me settle. I wasn't afraid anymore. I'm ready, I said, my voice steady. Let's do this. The days blurred together in the aftermath. What began as a quiet revolt in the guest room had escalated beyond what I had ever imagined. And now, here I was, sitting across from a therapist, a woman I had met for the first time just days ago. The scent of lavender from the room's candles filled my lungs, grounding me, as I settled into the cushioned chair. I hadn't expected therapy to feel like this, a kind of vulnerability I was not accustomed to. But after everything that had happened, the confession from Silas, the whistleblower's records, the emotional release, and the long days spent in limbo, I needed to process the wreckage of my life. I couldn't pretend it was just about Silas anymore. It was about me, and everything I had buried for too long. The therapist, Dr. Avery, looked at me kindly, waiting for me to speak. Tell me about the moment you realized you had to leave, Juniper, she asked gently. I hesitated. The question seemed simple, but the truth was so much more complicated. How did I distill years of neglect, emotional manipulation, and isolation into a single moment? I remember standing in the guest room, I began, my voice low and steady. I could feel Silas's presence on the other side of the door, waiting for me to apologize, to beg. But I didn't, I couldn't. I closed my eyes, the memory flooding back. Silas's face, the fury, the desperation, as I walked away from him. It was the first time I had ever walked away, the first time I had ever put myself first. I had always been the one to smooth things over, to keep everything in place. But in that moment, I realized I was never going to be the one to fix him, and I couldn't fix myself by staying. Dr. Avery nodded, her expression softening. And what did you do after that? I packed a bag, I went to the penthouse, grabbed a few of my things, and just left. I felt the weight of the words. I went to a hotel. I had to make sure I was safe. I didn't know what Silas might do. The fallout had been swift. Silas's company crumbled when the whistleblower's recordings, along with the financial evidence I had provided, were released to the board. The charges were too much to ignore: embezzlement, fraud, and worse. His empire began to unravel before my eyes. But it wasn't just Silas's business that collapsed. It was our life together, the life I had built around him, that I had to watch burn. I had to step back and let the truth come to light. And as much as I feared the consequences, I knew it was the only way forward. The press descended on the scandal, but I stayed silent. I knew the story they wanted to tell: the wronged wife who had finally walked away from the abusive husband. But there was more to it than that. I wasn't just walking away from Silas, I was walking away from the person I had become. But there was no denying the satisfaction I felt when the board removed him from his position. The confidence I had never known began to take root, slow and steady. The echoes of his control no longer resonated in my thoughts. Weeks passed, and therapy became my lifeline. Dr. Avery's office became my sanctuary, the place where I could peel back the layers of who I was and begin to rebuild. It was hard. It was uncomfortable. But it was necessary. Tell me about your relationship with your family, Dr. Avery asked during one of our sessions. You mentioned feeling disconnected before. I paused, letting the words hang in the air before responding. I thought I was protecting them by staying quiet, I said softly. But I wasn't protecting them. I was enabling it, keeping everyone at arm's length so I wouldn't have to face the truth. Dr. Avery nodded. And how does that feel now? Guilty, I admitted. I feel like I've betrayed them, like I've betrayed myself. But I'm learning that I wasn't the one to blame for everything. Derek, my brother, had been a constant presence through it all. Once he learned the full extent of Silas's manipulation and control, he stepped in with a level of loyalty and support I had never imagined. He was the ally I never knew I needed, the one person who truly understood the depth of my struggle. He had been there that night I left, standing by me when I had nowhere else to turn. I don't know how you did it, Juniper, he told me one evening over dinner, the two of us sitting together in a quiet cafe. I never knew the full extent of Silas's hold on you, but I'm proud of you for leaving, for taking control. His words, simple as they were, meant more than he could ever know. I wasn't just grateful for him, he had been the first person to see me as I truly was, not the woman I had pretended to be. I wasn't strong enough to do it alone, I confessed. But with you, with Margaret, I don't feel like I'm carrying the weight anymore. Derek smiled, a rare, sincere expression that softened the edges of his features. You're stronger than you think. While I worked on healing, Silas faced the consequences of his actions. The investigation into his financial dealings continued, and the truth about his manipulations was laid bare. But despite all the evidence, there was something that didn't sit right with me. Silas hadn't apologized, not once. But then, one day, I received a letter from him. The envelope was plain, nothing special, but the handwriting, his neat, controlled script, caught my attention. Juniper, I want you to know that I never intended for things to turn out this way. I was wrong. I am sorry. It wasn't much, but for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me. A tiny seed of closure had been planted. As the months passed, I took steps to heal. I rebuilt myself slowly, intentionally. I started a small practice in New York, focusing on therapy and helping others who had been manipulated by people like Silas. It felt like a calling, something that gave my life purpose beyond the mansion and the status I had once clung to. But the scars remained. They weren't visible, they were hidden deep inside me, tucked away in the corners of my mind where they would always linger. But that was okay. The scars were proof that I had survived. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk in the new office, I received an unexpected call. It was from Margaret. Her voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency. Juniper, I think it's time we make a move, she said, her tone sharp. We have everything we need. The case is airtight. It's time to take Silas down once and for all. I hesitated, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. This wasn't just about Silas anymore. This was about me, about reclaiming my life, about finally walking away from the chains that had bound me for so long. I'm ready, I said, the words steady and clear. Let's do it. Have you ever had to take a hard step toward reclaiming your life? What would you do if you found the courage to walk away from everything you thought you wanted? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, transformation, and the strength to start over. What will Juniper do next? Let's find out together.